think of ourselves as the most powerful beings in the universe, it's unsettling to discover that we're wrong. Time has come to see the world as it is.
Can we pull back the veil of static and reach into the source of all being? Behind this curtain lies this random pattern generator. You will be responsible for an escalation that will destroy everything.
In this episode, I'm going to begin getting into my spirit journal entries about a series of ritual procedures I would go through with various spirit beings in order to have negative parasitic beings removed from me by them. These parasitic presences can also be seen as energy blockages in the chakras of the human energy body. These are the beings which I mentioned before as often being perceived as worms or centipede-like. I have friends who have experienced extracting them themselves with their own methods, and they described them exactly as I had seen them earlier myself. From now on, when I mention that I saw a spirit or something spiritual, I don't mean that I see them with my eyes the same way I see physical people. It's very hard to describe this type of perception, but it is extremely vivid, striking, and sometimes surprising to me. Now onto the entry. Over the past couple of days, I've been continuing to microdose on psychoactives, ritualize, invoke, get pulled to an object, most often a toy or statue in my collection, ask my guide if it is okay, bring the object to the center of the room, and then allow whatever is associated with the object to work on me. After they do their work, I ask the spirit or force behind the object if they are done, and then put them back and thank them when they are. I repeat this for hours, taking occasional breaks, until my guide indicates that I should stop, and then I vanish. My guide tells me that some of these beings are living spirits which I have created who have the same physical appearance as the toy, statue, or other object which they are associated with, and that others are mind forms or tulpas based on the toys, and some are living and aware spirits and deities who have had an existence before and beyond the object I use to interact with them. Now, in these little interactions, I've mostly had things pulled out of me. Sometimes it is a simple matter of having something plucked out. Other times, it involves furious searches followed by extremely exhausting and somewhat frightening struggles to rip the damn things free. Strangely enough, sometimes they will put some kind of extra-dimensional apparatus or tube into me, through my eye socket or down my throat, which I actually kind of feel physically somehow. And then they will pull it out and quickly proceed to grab one of the spirit parasites deep inside. Sometimes this is so intense it involves me retching and gagging, something up to the point of throwing up a little bit sometimes. Other times, sneezing and expelling streams of mucus are involved. Somehow, it really aids them in the process if I use my imagination in addition to physical movements. For instance, sometimes I would visualize a little man on a little bulldozer inside me, pushing the parasitic presence up and out of me. Another interesting thing is that sometimes the nature of the character represented by a toy would be related to the nature of what the associated spirit would pull out of me. An example is a toy I have called the Heap. It is a monster made out of a conglomeration of garbage and refuse. When the mind-form spirit behind this toy first removed the blockage, I saw a cascading swarm of terrible little things exploding out of me. They looked like tiny, oily black worms. They gushed out of me in droves for quite a while before the torrent dwindled down. When I asked my guide about them, he said that they represented spiritual poisons and impurities, which I had ingested throughout my life by eating bad things like fast food. From that point on, the mind form behind the Heap would remove such impurities from me. When they haven't wrenched something out of me, they do other things I don't completely understand. A William Shakespeare toy of mine is associated with a spirit which seemed to open up my head and write something onto my brain. My guide later said that he was doing something positive to my creativity. A toy of Cortana, the hologram AI character from the Halo games, has given me the impression of some kind of blue scanning light. A Frankenstein to sort of lich alien hybrid toy I have is the connection point for a strong spirit who looks exactly like the toy and behaves like a scientist-physician type. He seemed to implant something in my head which allowed me to channel some kind of stronger connection to a song I was playing. When he is aggressively removing parasites from me, he is in the frightening form of the toy, but when he is in friendly mode, so to speak, he is a tall, bald man in a robe, the hood of which covers half of his face. I have a life-size cardboard cutout of a board from Star Trek Next Generation, and I saw a spirit in its form standing behind it. One of its eyes is a hologram deal, and I saw a colorful wavering beam of light shoot out of this hologram eye and scan my body. He then pinpointed a parasite in me this way and proceeded to extract it. My guide told me that this one was a mind form, so therefore not a living, conscious spirit. Sometimes when interacting with these objects in this way, I'll be pulled to one which my guide then warns is not okay, so I'll move on. After asking about it, the reason I've been warned away from those objects is because they are connected to spirits which would be trying to pull something really nasty and strong out of me, and I needed to go through this process a little more before I'm ready for that. There was a situation once, however, where my guide was moving my hand and my body in tow back and forth in front of the objects like he was trying to pinpoint something. The movements became more rapid and focused, like we were zeroing in on the escaping nasty. Eventually the movements abruptly stopped on a toy called Desiccator, so I put it out on the patio and closed the door. When I asked, my guide said that I should be okay to retrieve the toy the next morning. Another time I temporarily had to isolate 2 toys in the bathroom so that helping spirits could clear nastiness from them. Later that same night I used the bathroom and while walking out felt someone threatening coming up behind me, so I slammed the door on them before I felt them pass through. I was able to safely retrieve the toys after the operation was over and I had vanished.
What the hell in God's name is going down here?
In the Aleutian Islands, in the U.S., in the summer of 1945, the crew of a U.S. Army transport ship taking supplies to Alaska saw a large round object emerge from the sea a mile or so distant. They saw it climb straight up, then circle the ship before flying off to the south. There were 2 independent witnesses to an incident in the Strait of Juan de Fuca, Washington State on 9th March 1960. 2 lorry drivers, both east of Port Angeles, reported seeing a large flaming object descending into the water. Nothing was found, nor were any planes reported missing. There have been numerous other reports of objects seen crashing into the sea off Washington, Oregon, and California. Although in most cases nothing is ever found in the sea, an object was traced on the seabed following a splashdown off Loomy Island, Washington on the 27th of July, 1984. It was egg-shaped, metallic, and orange or golden color. One diver who stood on it said it was humming, and when he surfaced his boots were covered in a reddish dust. When the divers returned a few days later, the object had gone. An unusual submarine was seen off Avalon, Catalina, California, on the 28th of July 1962 by the captain and a crewman of a fishing boat. The captain saw lights low on the water just before dawn and went closer to investigate. Through binoculars, he saw a squat, lighted structure, which appeared to be the stern of a submarine, with men working on it. Quote, "We could see 5 men, 2 in all white garb, 2 in dark trousers and white shirts, and 1 in a sky blue jumpsuit. We passed the beam at about a quarter mile, and I was certain it was the submarine low in the water, steel gray, no markings, deck almost awash, with only its tail, and an odd aft structure showing. It came towards them and swept past its speed, heading for the open sea, still on the surface. It was assumed to be a new type of Russian submarine, but there are doubts about that identification. On the western coast of the South American continent, there was a sighting from a fishing vessel 20 miles off the coast of Chile, near Tocopilla in the north. There were many witnesses of a UFO on the 23rd and 24th of September 1971, including police witnesses. After about 8 hours, the UFO, a red ball, was seen by the ship's crew as it flew around the ship for several minutes. They then watched it sink into the sea about 3 miles away. The Argentine coast in particular seems to attract USOs. Our earliest report here dates from June 1950, where a man on a long-distance walk from Tierra del Fuego to Buenos Aires was walking along the Atlantic coast between San Sebastian and Rio Grande late at night. He heard a noise like water being disturbed, and saw a luminous oval object emerge from the sea about 1,500 feet offshore. It flew off towards the land. A fortnight later, the same witness saw a similar occurrence when he was between Rio Gallegos and Santa Cruz. This time 4 UFOs came out of the sea. On October 25, 1974, in Rawlins, Wyoming, Carl Higdon, an oil driller in his early 40s, was elk hunting on the northern boundary of the Medicine Bow National Forest when he spotted 5 elk and fired at the bull. But the bullet went only about 50 feet and dropped, as if it had struck a wall. When Higdon heard his twig snap, he turned to see a human-like figure in the shadow of a nearby tree. The man was bow-legged, stood about 6 feet 2, and weighed about 180 pounds. He wore a black suit and black shoes. One belt crossed his breast, another his waist. The waist belt had a star at the buckle and a yellow emblem on an apron-like flap beneath it. His face was nearly human, but was sloped and without a chin. The nose was flat, the brows were hairless, and the ears were not visible. His mouth showed but 6 teeth, 3 above and 3 below. The hair on his head was thin and stood up like straw. Higdon saw no hands on the man, but his right arm ended in a cone-shaped device, which Higdon called a gun. The man called himself Auso, and offered Higdon a packet of 4 pills. Auso claimed they satisfied one's hunger for 4 days. Higdon took one, though ordinarily he never even took aspirin. Auso then invited Higdon to come along, and he accepted. When Auso pointed his right arm, Higdon suddenly found himself inside a transparent cubicle, strapped to a chair and wearing a helmet. In the cubicle were 4 seats, a mirror, a control panel, another being like Auso, and the 5 elk frozen still in a kind of cage behind him. When Also pointed his arm at the controls, the cubicle began moving and Higdon saw Earth receding below him. Moments later, they landed on a dark planet that Also said was 163,000 light-years away. Outside the cubicle was a huge tower with a bright rotating light, making a sound like an electric razor. Standing in that nearby plaza were what looked like 5 humans in conversation. 2 blonde teenage girls, 1 teenage boy, a slightly younger girl, and a gray-haired man of 40 or 50. When Also pointed his arm again, Higdon found himself inside a room in the tower. A shield-like device came out of the wall in front of Higdon for several minutes, then retracted. At the end of this examination, Also told Higdon he was not what they needed and would be taken back. Also returned Higdon's rifle regretfully and floated the remaining pills out of his pocket. Higdon then found himself standing on a rocky slope back on Earth, where he fell and injured himself. About 2.5 hours had passed. He found his truck in a place where the terrain was too rough for him to drive into or out of. He called for help on his CB. The rescue party found Higdon disoriented and confused, and his truck had to be towed out. He began relating this episode while in the hospital. A nearly identical armed being was observed by an 8-year-old boy in Wales in July of 1976. On the approximate date of August 18, 1953, in the evening in the Ciudad Valles in Mexico, cab driver Salvador Villanueva, 40, observed 2 creatures 1.2 meters tall wearing coveralls with wide, shiny, perforated belts, metal collars, and small black shiny boxes on their backs. They had helmets under their arms. The witness thought that they were pilots of Indian race. One of them spoke to him in Spanish, stringing the words together in a strange accent. Trivial matters were discussed until dawn, when they returned to their craft 13 meters in diameter through a staircase under the lower disc. The witness ran away when invited to follow them. The object rose with a pendulum motion and shot up vertically. September 4th, 1953, 21:30 hours. In Tournai, France, a woman saw 2 objects on the ground and 3 1.5-meter tall men running toward the craft. They had oversized heads and wore helmets and boots. One entered the elongated object 5 meters long, 1.5 meters wide, which spread wings that made it look like a butterfly. It then took a vertical position, resting on a tripod, and took off with the spherical object into which the other 2 creatures had gone. Traces were found at the spot. On September 12, 1953, Brost, Denmark, was the scene of an attempted abduction of a girl by 2 humanoids emitting a golden light. Their hands were rugged and cold like a fish. On October 25, 1953, at 21:30 hours in Santa Fe, New Mexico, Jim Milligan, 16, was driving through a park when he saw something fall in front of his car and stopped as the object landed in some bushes. He walked towards it, found a craft that looked like 2 ship hulls about 3 meters long, 2 meters wide, glued together. When he tried to touch it, the object flew away. In November 1953, in Giresgion Bridge, Norway, Mrs. Trygve, Mrs. Buflot, and a neighbor saw an object rise from behind a hill, oscillate over a lake, follow their car, and stop ahead of them just above the ground. They stopped, felt pricklings, until the craft took off vertically. A watch stopped working, and numerous people vouched for the fact that the paint on the car changed from dark beige to bright green. In Argentina, a family of 5 claims they encountered a humanoid creature in the southern area of the Patagonia province. The Argentinian family says they were camping in Puerto Coig when an unidentified noise caught their attention. Quote, "It was about midnight, Monday, October 16th. We heard a continuous soft noise. It lasted for about 1 hour," said the father of 3 on MUFON. "My kids, who are into astronomy, study in Buenos Aires, so we figured we'd go and camp in a quiet area and observe the stars." An hour later, he adds, "An electric blue light illuminated the western sky. It felt as though someone was lighting up the sky. We decided to go and check out the valley, thinking it could be coming from an oil field." The Argentinian man explains that as they reached the valley, a gray and big helicopter was flying over the blue light. The helicopter didn't have any lights on, but the blue light under it kept it visible. It was noiseless. The actual noise was coming from the valley. Suddenly, a humanoid figure reportedly came out of the valley and began walking toward the family. "It was very tall. We initially thought it was human, but then we used the binoculars and realized it didn't have hands or feet. It was hovering over the ground." The man described the entity as having a long and thin neck, and it had an object wrapped around it like a dark collar with a spinning light. "When this thing put its arms up, we began running like crazy, trying to reach the camping area. As soon as we arrived, we clumsily got everything on our backpacks, got in the van, and left at high speed." The eyewitnesses claim they snapped a few pictures of the incident with an adapter on the binoculars, but these pictures were not posted on the MUFON report. 2 additional reports about a similar event in the area were posted to the website just 1 day earlier. In Columbia, South Carolina, a dinosaur-like creature was reportedly spotted. Columbia resident Anita Sullivan told Cryptozoology News she was driving with her husband on Interstate 20 on November 30th when they came upon the animal at around 12:30 p.m. Quote, We were headed eastbound, crossing the Broad River Bridge. I was just looking out of the window casually and just happened to see what at first looked like a large snake moving slowly down the river, with its body moving slightly under the water, said Sullivan. It was coming north towards the bridge, and it looked to the left as it came up, above the top of the water. The sighting purportedly lasted about 10 seconds, and Sullivan said she was not able to snap a picture of the aquatic being. I was highly excited and freaked out. I didn't think to take a picture. The long-necked animal is described as being black in color. It was finally breaking the surface of the water. I thought it was a baby dinosaur. A man says he was startled by a reptilian bipedal creature on an Oklahoma road. The man, a 63-year-old Oklahoma City dispatcher who asked to remain anonymous, told Cryptozoology News he was driving to work in the early morning when he encountered the purported creature. Quote, I was driving east on Southwest 29th Street at 4:30 a.m. on a Saturday. There was a full moon. I usually don't work on Saturdays, but this Saturday we were having the driver's safety meetings while I was on my way in, taking my time and only doing 35 miles per hour, he reported about the December 6, 2015 encounter. I was coming off a 2-lane to a 4-lane. On my side of the road there was a culvert. The being jumped up on the side of the road, standing on the curb looking at me. The dispatcher, who claims the humanoid stood there for about 60 seconds, provided Cryptozoology News with a detailed sketch, describing it as a 3-foot-tall humanoid with lizard skin. Its color, he says, was cream and iridescent. Quote, it had large eyes and small pointed ears. Its eyes were orange with no glow when the headlights hit them. It had a small mouth with a nose similar to a cat. It had 3 toes curled over the edge of the curb with heels like a human. Extremely large thighs that matched the base of its tail. Its tail was extremely long with the huge base tapering down to no bigger than a matchstick, he recalls. The man added that the creature was flicking its tail, standing like an angry cat. But once it was on the move, it carried it straight out behind him. He explains that the being seemed extremely intelligent, and it felt as though it was watching him and thinking. Quote, it was as if it was calculating where it could make it across in front of me without getting hit. It made it to the center yellow line, then looked at me again, before sprinting off into the woods on the opposite side of the road. The eyewitness said that he had been traveling the same road for 7 years and had never encountered anything like this. The creature looked like something that belonged in the movie Avatar, something I will likely never forget, he said. And now some strange events from Denmark. At Lake Fjoreso, north of Copenhagen, violent splashing at private boat pier scene, and boat briefly lifted clear of the water. Several 1-inch planks were splintered, February 1944. At Lake Kildevald, Alsterbro, Copenhagen, couple strolling by lake saw a dark object projecting more than 3 feet, which moved across lake and then came back, July 1986. At Sonderborg, mechanics saw UFO land and became paralyzed. Also, birds stopped singing and cows were immobile. 4 entities in black with helmets emerged, and others on deck appeared to be making repairs. 8 other objects came out and hovered before flying away, 19th June 1951. Near Svendborg, man on bicycle saw disc-shaped UFO, luminous and seemingly made of glass, spinning at ground level. It chased him at a height of 20 feet, 15th April 1959. Now leaving Denmark, going to Palenque, San Cristobal, Dominican Republic, 22nd September 1972. Driver flagged down by 3 entities in green clothing with yellow-gray skin. Witness saw oval UFO in bushes. One entity told him he was Freddie Miller, a Dominican who had been rescued from drowning in the sea by a UFO and taken to Venus to live. After a few minutes' talk, the entities left. Miller, a believer in UFOs, had disappeared in 1959 on a boating expedition. Now some poltergeist events from East Germany. In Hofgarten, near Weimar, poltergeist outbreak with rapping centered on dying woman, 14th to 28th February 1921. And in Leipzig, poltergeist outbreak, 4th September to 20th November 1931. And in the Andes Mountains in Ecuador, reports of 4 to 5 foot hair-covered hominoids called Shiru. And now 2 events of apparent Mary sightings from Cairo in Egypt. In Shelbra, thousands of people saw apparition of Blessed Virgin Mary on roof of church of Saint Damiana in Papadopoulos, beginning March 1986. Now in Zagtown, hundreds of thousands of people saw luminous apparitions above a church, which were interpreted as the Blessed Virgin Mary, April 1968 to May 1971.
What the hell in God's name is going down here?
That was a public service announcement designed to scare the shit out of you.
And now reading another undated entry from the past. I think it was most definitely 2014. There was recently a striking incident regarding my recent ritualized and psychedelic spiked interactions with non-physical beings. I have a monkey statue which has a spirit associated with it. I had put the statue on top of a tall light fixture, which I accidentally jostled a bit, causing the monkey to fall to the floor and shatter. Picking up the pieces, I asked the spirit if the shattering of the monkey affected them at all, and they assured me that they were fine. I apologized, and they responded that it was silly for me to feel sorry. I found some broken bits of it, but I could not find the base anywhere. I looked under the coffee table, under my couch, swept my hand under the dresser, and was still unable to find the base, which was rather large and heavy. I gave up and threw the rest of the statue in the trash. The next night, when I was doing my nightly routine with the spirits, I looked down to find the base of the monkey statue right where the object had originally fallen, after I had just been at that spot only seconds ago. It was not under the couch or swept somewhere behind the entertainment center. It was right there in the middle of the floor. Now, let me assure you there was no natural way at all for that object to be where it was. Absolutely not possible. Now, this was more mind-shattering to me than other strange experiences I had had while I was invoked. For instance, one time I was directed to put a certain toy out on the patio. After I had done that, I looked down on the floor and noticed that a horn from it had appeared on the floor inside. And I had been walking over that spot. I think I would have stepped on it. I would have seen it. And I was like, well, perhaps when I put it down, the horn came off somehow and bounced into the apartment and landed there, and I didn't see it. But anyway, I just kind of wrote it off. The base of that broken monkey statue being right there in the floor where it was when it was, there was no sense I could make of it. I could not explain it away. I mean, it was even crazier than a time a little bit before that when a stack of DVDs and video games sitting on my coffee table was just shoved right off when I was communicating with a spirit being, and they claimed responsibility, trying to, reinforce that they were really right there. But yeah, this monkey statue base incident was reality shattering. Eventually, the spirit, which was associated with the monkey statue, claimed that the whole thing was something which they had set up to teach me a lesson about reality. And when I look back on it, it seems strange that it broke on impact. It was a carpeted floor. I don't know. It was a bit unusual. But anyway, I guess what they were trying to point out to me is basically that those who insist that consciousness and mind are categorically subordinate to matter are just dead wrong. This is something which physics has been hinting at for quite a while. My spirits say that mind over matter is merely the beginning of understanding the true nature of reality and mind. That we have no idea how much we can exercise mastery over matter itself. Now here's another post that follows that one and relates to it. In the last post, I forgot to mention a rather curious occurrence. Just minutes after the missing base of the monkey statue appeared on the floor, I completely forgot about the incident. Now, think about it. It was a reality-shattering experience, and yet I somehow immediately forgot about it after it happened. I almost instantly had no memory of it at all. Now, full disclosure, I drink a little bit of wine to take the edge off the psilocybin, but I certainly wasn't drunk and undoubtedly wasn't wasted enough to completely forget something which broke the laws of the reality I was raised to believe in. I only remembered it when I saw the base of the statue again, and the recollection of the event hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, how could I have possibly forgotten about that? Everything else in the night I clearly remembered. So, to ensure that I would not forget again, somehow, I put the base down on a piece of paper on the kitchen counter and used a Sharpie to draw a circle around the object. I just instinctively felt to do that. I then put north, south, east, and west markings on the corresponding points of the circle. Once again, something I did completely out of instinct on the spot. Lastly, I scrawled, "This fucking happened, it is still happening." In all caps, 3 exclamation points with an arrow pointing to the statue base. I was like, I know I'll remember, it's just a silly precaution, I said to myself. How could I forget? Yeah, I was thinking I couldn't, as long as I didn't guzzle a whole bottle of vodka and take one of Joe Bluth's Forget-Me-Now pills from Arrested Development, or I think Will Smith flash a light in my face. Right? Apparently not. I woke up the next morning, practiced the usual routine, used the bathroom, brushed my teeth, feed the cats, everything normal. I had no memory of the event at all. Until I turned around in the kitchen and saw that Aaron statue base contained in a circle with the urgent message from myself glaring up at me from the past. At that moment, everything came flooding back, and I almost screamed in astonishment. If I had just thrown out the base the previous night, it is quite possible that I would have completely forgotten about the return of the missing monkey statue base. Oh, sounds like a Hardy Boys adventure. And that would mean reality-breaking event lost. That loss in memory seemed completely abnormal. I have never had an issue of missing memory like that before in my life, and my spirits assured me it was not normal. In fact, they told me that, something or someone wanted me to forget. And I think it wants us all to forget.
He was abducted by aliens earlier this afternoon. That little girl got lost under the bed and she went into an alternate dimension.
This article is called Mysterious Fires, Officials Blamed on UFOs and Aliens Return to Sicily, posted on OpenMinds.tv by Alexandro Rojas. In 2004, a town in northern Sicily experienced mysterious spontaneous fires that officials purportedly suspected were the result of alien activity. Now the mysterious fires have returned. The fires are appearing in Caneto di Coronia, a town on the northern coast of Sicily. In 2004, the town had to be largely evacuated and dozens of experts were flown in to investigate. The power company cut off power to the town in order to stop the fires, but they continued. Scientists, electrical engineers, and the military all tried to figure out why the fires were starting, but no one could figure it out. According to the UK newspaper The Telegraph, one scientist was amazed when, quote, he saw an unplugged electrical cable burst into flames. Eventually the fires subsided, but the Italian government spent years investigating them. According to The Telegraph, the investigation cost over $1 million and included dozens of experts, including a NASA scientist. The newspaper also claims that the officials concluded the most likely cause was aliens. Now the fires have apparently come back. According to the UK newspaper Metro, the mayor believes them to be caused by, quote, unknown electromagnetic radiation. However, locals believe they may be caused by ghosts, witches, secret US military tests of radiation weapons, poltergeists, rogue microwave transmitters, or perhaps even a young person with pyrokinetic powers, like in the Stephen King book made into a blockbuster movie, Firestarter. A local council member, Vittorio Alfieri, has been investigating the fires. He says one television has burst into flames 5 times. He believes it is caused by, quote, an entity which moves from one house to another. He said in an interview, quote, a house on the ground floor caught fire, and then it was the turn of objects on the first floor. Consequently, the fire moved to the nearby house. It was like it was moving. In 2004, the Vatican's chief exorcist, Father Gabriele Amorth, said he thought the Caneto di Coronia fires were caused by demons. He said, quote, I've seen things like this before. Demons occupy a house and appear in electrical goods. Let's not forget that Satan and his followers have immense powers. Last year, Discovery TV posted a vignette on the fires for their TV show The Unexplained Files. In it, they interview Antonio Spinato, a local who suspects UFO sightings in the area are related to the phenomena. He says he caught UFOs on film following military helicopters. He also says one night, he and some friends were attacked by the UFOs. He explained, quote, we saw strange lights going up towards the sky in a really bizarre way. He says he then felt a burning sensation, and the next day he had burns on his arm and forehead that he says looked as if he had been zapped by a laser. His friends also had burn marks. For more insight into the Caneto di Coronia fires, I contacted Italian UFO researcher Paola Harris. I have seen her discuss the incident in lectures, and she was able to share additional information. Harris says that when the event started, she spoke with a man in the Italian Navy who worked in intelligence in Rome at the Italian Navy Academy. Harris says, quote, he told me spheres of light were coming out of the water, and it was pretty terrifying that I should not involve myself. According to Harris, houses were self-combusting, cell phones would auto-recharge, electrical appliances were malfunctioning, even if the power was turned off. People were moved out of the town and cameras were placed everywhere. She says no one was hurt, but people were witnessing balls of light in broad daylight. They began to believe that there was an underwater UFO base off the coast. Paola says, just like the official report, the man she spoke with also believed UFOs were related. According to the report by the Italian government, the fires were, quote, caused by a high-power electromagnetic emission which was not man-made and reached a power of between 12 and 15 gigawatts. They also cited a case of a possible UFO landing where, quote, burnt imprints which have not been explained were found in a field. Sicily's civil protection chief, Francesco Mantegna Venerando, who coordinated the report, said, quote, this is not the final report. We are still working on our conclusions and this has been leaked. He continued, we are not saying that little green men from Mars started the fires, but that unnatural forces capable of creating a large amount of electromagnetic energy were responsible. Now that the phenomenon has returned, perhaps more can be learned about the nature of the mysterious fires, and hopefully they will not claim their first victim.
Time has come to see the world as it is.
This article is called 500-Year-Old Map Was Discovered That Shatters the Official History of the Planet. It was posted to collectiveevolution.com on February 24, 2015 by Arjun Walia. Human history is quite an enigma. We know so little, and much of what we think we know is always subject to change, since information constantly emerges that challenges our current understanding of the world. Our world is also no stranger to unexplained mysteries, and there are numerous examples of verified phenomena, ancient monuments, books, teachings, understandings, and more that lack any explanation and counter what we've already been taught. We are like a race with amnesia. able to put together small bits and pieces of our history, yet unable to fit it all together. There are still many missing pieces to the puzzle. One great example is the Piri Reis map, a genuine document that was copied at Constantinople in AD 1513 from older documents and discovered in 1929. It focuses on the western coast of Africa, the eastern coast of South America, and the northern coast of Antarctica. It was drawn by Admiral Piri Reis of the Ottoman era, a well-known historical figure. He made a copy of the map, which was originally drawn based on documents that date back to at least the 4th century BC and on information obtained by multiple explorers. One of the most compelling facts about the map is that it includes a continent that our history books tell us was not discovered until 1818. Secondly, the map depicts what is known as Queen Maud Land, a 2.7 million square kilometer region of Antarctica, as it looked millions of years ago. This region and other regions shown on the map are thought to have been covered completely in ice, but the map tells a different story, showing them free of ice, which suggests they passed through a long ice-free period that may not have ended until around 6,000 years ago, conflicting with current research on these areas. Today, geological evidence has confirmed that this area could not have been ice-free until around 4000 BC. Official science has been saying all along that the ice cap which covers the Antarctic is millions of years old. The Piri Reis map shows that the northern part of that continent had been mapped before the ice did cover it, which means that it was mapped a million years ago, but that's impossible, since mankind did not exist at that time. Professor Charles Hapgood, who was a university history professor, wrote to the United States Air Force Reconnaissance Technical Squadron, the SAC, and they also confirmed that, quote, this indicates the coastline had been mapped before it was covered by the ice cap, end quote. They also went on to state that, quote, we have no idea how the data on this map can be reconciled with the supposed state of geographical knowledge in 1513. Here's what Hapgood had to say about it in his book Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings. It appears that accurate information has been passed down from people to people. It appears that the charts must have originated with a people unknown, and they were passed on, perhaps by the Minoans and the Phoenicians, who were, for 1,000 years and more, the greatest sailors of the ancient world. We have evidence that they were collected and studied in the great library of Alexandria, in Egypt, and that compilations of them were made by the geographers that worked there. Furthermore, the map is very detailed and includes mountain ranges in the Antarctic that were not even discovered until 1952. This is Einstein on Hapgood's interpretations of the map. His idea is original, of great simplicity, and, if it continues to prove itself, of great importance to everything that is related to the history of the Earth's surface. Hapgood and mathematician Richard W. Strachan have also provided more mind-boggling information. For example, a comparison with modern-day photographs taken from satellite images shows remarkable similarities. The originals of Piri Reis's map might well have been aerial photographs taken from a very high height. How is that possible for a map that was made millions of years ago? The fact that this ancient map could have been made with some sort of aerial technology is quite a thought. Even if this isn't an option, who had the technology to undertake such an accurate geographical survey in Antarctica 2 million years ago? How would they have known to detail the map as if it were taken from above, with knowledge about the Earth's shape? It remains a mystery how the Sumerians, Mayans, and others were aware of celestial bodies in space, for instance, that are impossible to detect without modern technology, and were able to make calculations based on that awareness. This map is another example of just such a mystery, and suggests that the existence of some sort of ancient advanced civilization, with all the tools, or possibly more, of modern-day civilization is indeed plausible. For more detailed information regarding this truly fascinating map, I suggest you check out Graham Hancock's Fingerprints of the Gods. I'd also like to mention that this map is part of a very large body of evidence suggesting that extremely intelligent, very advanced ancient civilizations once inhabited the Earth.
Time has come to see the world as it is.
This article is called Why I Drifted Away from the Atheist Movement. It was posted to medium.com on February 14th, 2015 by Clint Finley, a Wired reporter. I don't believe in God. And though I meditate and seek sublime experiences, I don't think of myself as quote-unquote spiritual. I am, in short, an atheist. But for the past few years, I've been hesitant to call myself one. Not because I'm worried about being shunned by my friends or in my community. I live in a very secular city and work in a very secular industry. Few of my friends are religious, and those that are have been exceedingly tolerant of my beliefs, or lack thereof. No, I'm loath to use the A word because the most vocal and visible proponents of atheism have strayed far away from promoting reason, tolerance, and secular values, and into promoting misogyny, xenophobia, and far-right politics. But for at least a couple years, from sometime in 2006 until sometime in 2009, I was a militant atheist, dashing off dozens of blog posts condemning religious thought for promoting murder and mutilation. I thought we, the atheists of the world, were railing against injustice and speaking truth to power. Atheism felt just and true and important, but no longer. What happened? Atheism is justification for xenophobia. Over time, I'd sensed that for far too many people in the movement, atheism was, if not a front, then at least a rationalization for xenophobia or racism or both. As a longtime advocate of permissive immigration policies, that didn't sit well for me. I thought, and still do think, that one of the best ways a secular society can help those living under extremist religious regimes is to welcome them into our own countries. What I saw instead were atheists aligning themselves with bigots and Christian fundamentalists to promote xenophobic propaganda and reactionary immigration policies. I joined in with many other atheist bloggers in posting fitna when it came out, but ended up feeling like a tool for doing so. That was probably the beginning of the end. A changing view of religion. I was eventually swayed by anthropologist Scott Atran's critique of movement atheism and his argument that it would be better to try to curb terrorism by providing role models through media such as comic books than trying to eradicate religion. Over time, I also began to realize that I, like many other movement atheists, had been equating Islam as a whole with a relatively small fringe. Although I often included the caveat that most Muslims were peaceful, I wrote about Islam as if it were one big thing as opposed to a moniker for a great many different strains of belief. That realization was driven home as I met more Muslims personally and saw how little they shared in common with the likes of the Taliban. Although I bristled at first at the term Islamophobia, since I think it's entirely reasonable to critique religion in general and Islam in particular, I've come to realize that it's a perfectly fitting term for what it describes: an irrational fear and hatred of all people who practice any form of that religion. When you spend a lot of time reading about fatwas against Salman Rushdie, it can be easy to get paranoid about a huge international network of Muslim assassins out to kill anyone who criticizes the religion. But that doesn't exist, and the fear-mongering Islamophobia does no one any good. Meanwhile, I was developing a more nuanced view of what organized religion as a whole actually is, which I suppose I should save for another essay. Suffice it to say, I simply became less worried about religion as an institution. Then there was the monomaniacal focus on religion to the exclusion of all other issues. I was particularly frustrated with what I saw as a lack of interest on the part of movement atheists in the root causes of extreme religiosity, such as poverty and lack of access to education. Given the broad overlap between atheism and libertarianism, I started to notice a tendency of atheists to blame poverty on religion rather than vice versa. The end of religion was being promoted as a panacea that could solve all the world's troubles. I also developed a sense that movement atheists wouldn't be happy with any other movement until they dropped all other causes and joined the crusade against Islam. Gay marriage in the US was to take a back seat to the treatment of gays in predominantly Muslim nations. No feminist issues were to be discussed ever, not as long honor killing was still happening anywhere in the world. Honor killing became a particular sticking point for me as I started to look into and think more deeply about crimes of passion, as they're called when a non-Muslim man commits them, and lethal domestic violence in the US, and came to the conclusion that it had more to do with toxic masculinity than religion. That led me to fully embrace feminist thought, putting me further at odds with the atheist movement. By 2011, when Dawkins published his Dear Muslima comment suggesting that women who complained about sexual harassment in the workplace should shut the fuck up because at least they weren't having their genitals mutilated, I'd already drifted away. But it's a nice illustration of just about everything that's wrong with movement atheism. Consider, for example, Dawkins' hypocrisy in writing that comment. He suggested that the incident that Rebecca Watson described, and the subsequent harassment she received as a result of daring to mention it, was so minor in comparison to the myriad ways that women suffer in other parts of the world that she shouldn't even talk about it at all. But if people should only mention the worst of all abuses, then why is Dawkins even writing about a woman writing about her experiences? Shouldn't he be writing about something more important? The inescapable conclusion is that Dawkins was merely using atheism as a bludgeon to silence women who dare to speak out against abuse in the West because the topic made him uncomfortable. He felt threatened by women and did what he could to push the conversation away from the ways men abuse women in the West. And we've seen that again and again in the atheist community in recent years, from the barbaric treatment of women like Jennifer McCreight within the atheist community to Dawkins' rape victim blaming. If there was a single sharp jumping moment, though, it had to have been the controversy surrounding Park 51, the so-called Ground Zero Mosque, a planned community center that was to include, in addition to a performing arts center, swimming pool and gym, among other things, a large prayer room. Movement atheists thought the idea of Muslims praying inside a building 2 blocks away from the World Trade Center site was so offensive that it should be illegal. Yes, the very same people who gleefully published drawings of Muhammad to intentionally offend Muslims were offended at the very thought of someone praying in a room behind closed doors. Liberal values like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, and property rights went right out the window. That was especially rich coming from the libertarians. That whole ordeal, along with the movement's vocal support of France's burqa ban, laid bare the hypocrisy and irrationality of the atheist movement. It was then clear that this movement wasn't about fighting theocracy, giving voice to those oppressed by religion, or advancing the ideals of an open society. It was about imposing their own beliefs on other people, and I wanted nothing to do with it. I started writing this about a week ago while thinking about the role of atheism in the overlapping reactionary pickup artist, Gamergate, and men's rights advocacy communities, recently dubbed the Red Pill Right. It made me think about what I'd once had in common with those men and what had changed. And then this week, 3 Muslim people were murdered in Chapel Hill by a militant atheist. Someone who wrote things on Facebook that sound not entirely unlike things I used to write on my blog. Of course, there are those, like Dawkins, who will argue that actually it's about ethics and parking violations. But by Dawkins' own logic, all atheists, myself included, now have blood on our hands, by making the world safe for extremists like Craig Stephen Hicks. And there's probably some truth to that, which leaves me wondering where to go from here. There's a case to be made that I and all other non-believers who don't share a reactionary, misogynistic view of the world should become active in movement atheism to turn it around and make it safe for the marginalized. Maybe we could even change the minds of some of the worst offenders in the scene. But I think changing those minds will be subject to the same sort of backlash effects that we see when trying to convert the religious to atheism. Those of us who don't fit in with this brand of atheism are simply best moving on. We can promote reason and secular values without the tunnel vision of movement atheism. Better than to wander away and leave these sad, frightened men to shout into the darkness alone with nary a god to hear them.
Time has come to see the world as it is.
This article is called The Nature of Mind in the Holographic Brain. It was posted to wariscrime.com on January 9th, 2015, and it is by Brandon West. The purpose of this article is to provide evidence that strongly indicates that you are not your brain, or your body for that matter, and that the nature of mind, of memory, and of our brains may actually be vastly different than we have been led to believe. Since time immemorial, man has been fascinated by the mind, leading great thinkers from Hippocrates to Descartes to ponder the nature of mind with wonder. Fast forward to modern times and observe how the mind is still revered and is dominating our culture. We have a lot of firm beliefs about the nature of mind, and I believe the ego, our limited perception of ourselves, and thus human ignorance, is intricately tied in with these beliefs. But the truth of the matter is that we only understand a fraction of the mind's potential, its capability of rote memorization and other analytically oriented functions, and we use even less. We know hardly anything about the brain, let alone the nature of mind. Is it possible that we are missing crucial aspects of its function and entire areas of development and potential that simply slide under the radar because they are not accepted by modern thought? In this article, we will explore the idea that the brain itself, with its tissue and neurons that we have until now deemed the source of our thoughts and identity, is actually just a tool, a receiver of human intelligence and consciousness, but not its source. And that the human mind is not sourced in the brain any more than the internet can be found in your laptop or your modem. Here's a quote from Nikola Tesla. "My brain is only a receiver. In the universe, there is a core from which we obtain knowledge, strength, and inspiration. I have not penetrated into the secrets of this core, but I know that it exists." To begin, I would like to delve into the work of a Canadian neurosurgeon named Wilder Penfield. Through his work with epileptic patients spanning from the 1930s into the 1970s, he found that, quote, "stimulation of the human cerebral cortex with a gentle electrical current sometimes awakens specific memories, at other times dreams," end quote. His work gave him insight into the function of the brain, memory, mind, and the interactions between them. This information on Wilder Penfield's experiments is from his lectures, The Mechanism of Memory and Some Mechanisms of Consciousness Discovered During Electrical Stimulation of the Brain, unless otherwise specified. During brain surgery, once the brain was exposed, he found that by using an electrode that produced a gentle electrical current, he could stimulate areas of the brain and get specific, repeatable, intriguing, and oftentimes simply fascinating results. The patients were kept conscious throughout the procedure so that the doctors could carry out a conversation throughout the operation and receive immediate feedback on the nature of the experience these electrical currents would produce. In one case, an area he stimulated caused a man to not only hear a piano being played, but also to see the man sitting in front of him playing the piano. In another case, a boy reported seeing men sitting on a chair and singing, and in yet another case, the patient heard a complete orchestra. In each of these situations, the individuals involved didn't see fleeting shapes of people or the wisp of a song, but they saw the image as vivid and clear as if they were actually there in the room. One woman even heard a song which turned out to not even have been one of her favorite songs, being played when an area of her brain was being stimulated. When stimulated at intervals without her knowledge, because the brain has no tactile sensation, the same song began playing again from the exact same spot. The sound was so clear and flawless that she mistook a device in the operating room as a musical device that they were stopping and starting at intervals. In all cases, the patients recalled the events not like you would commonly recall a memory, which is usually a fleeting mental image, but rather in such explicit detail that it was literally like they were reliving the event in question. Some patients literally saw people in front of them and heard them just as clearly as if they were actually there. As Dr. Penfield phrased it, it was like the mind was able to, quote, project a memory or a dream upon the screen of consciousness. Moreover, he found that when he stimulated the brains of individuals and they remembered something, an image, or sound, or a feeling, those memories were always accompanied by the thought processes that accompanied them at the time. Therefore, our brains record sensory data as a whole unit. In my article, The Unified Field and the Illusion of Time, we explored some evidence supporting the understanding that all information is encoded directly into the field, the energy density of space-time all around us, which unfortunately is beyond the scope of this article. But if we apply that understanding to the perception going on in this circumstance when Wilder Penfield stimulated the brains of his patients, what occurred was that his patients seemed to have perfect recall of past events and, in visual cases, 3D or holographic memory. This is not a normal perception. What if the stimulation of the brain itself caused his patients to project their memory onto the field? Or what if that information was already present in a holographic sense, meaning that those images and those songs and memories were encoded within the field, possibly recording directly into the field by the brain itself, and the stimulation, by chance, allowed them to perceive the memory directly in the field? This not only suggests the possibility of holographic memory in human beings, but a very different understanding of memory itself, which we shall explore later. The other thing that is interesting is that the events which were brought back were entirely mundane, meaning they were generally ordinary events of no significance. This suggests that our brains actually record every detail of our lives, even the mundane and ordinary, and that they are accessible to us if we could figure out how to access it, or in other words, how to tap into the full potential of our minds. Wilder Penfield himself remarked that if the brain was indeed recording all of experience, then it is only natural that when dipping into this massive archive of information and memory, that we happen upon ordinary events considering the vast quantity of information recorded in our lifetime. In Deepak Chopra's book, How to Know God, he also cites how Wilder Penfield noted that the brain even retains memory while dormant, such as the fact that when patients are under deep anesthesia during surgery, about 1% of the population has a recollection of what the doctors were saying and even some details of the procedure. It is interesting that, quote, under deep anesthesia, there are practically no higher brainwaves at all, making it impossible for the cerebral cortex to accomplish anything so complex as remembering what a surgeon is saying. This is one of the reasons why Wilder Penfield concluded, after nearly 40 years of research, that the mind was an entity separate from the brain, and which did not rely on the brain to function. Deepak Chopra, in his lecture series with Wayne Dyer, entitled Living Beyond Miracles, tells of another of Wilder Penfield's experiments where he is stimulating the motor cortex of a patient's brain, which causes the patient to raise their arm in front of them. If we were to ask the man if it is him moving his arm, he would reply, "No, I am not." But when Penfield asked him to move his arm to the side, the patient could move his arm, and he responded with something akin to, "I am moving my arm now," or "Now I am moving my arm." Who is this I am presence who is doing the moving? And why is it not activated when the body is moving on its own? If our brain is the source of who we are, then any stimulation thereof which resulted in motion should give us the perception that it is us who is moving, but as Deepak Chopra states, because that is not the case, this is indicative that our brain is not who we are, that the brain and body is only superficially related to who we are, and that the brain most certainly is not the source of who we are. Evidence for the holographic brain concept, and that our brain is only a recorder of experience, not the source of the mind, can be found in a study done by Johns Hopkins University, where they worked with brain-damaged children. They found that they could improve their level of intelligence and physical coordination by removing the damaged hemisphere of their brain. In essence, they literally cut out the damaged chunk of the children's brain. Within our current understanding of the brain, this operation should significantly damage, if not irreparably hinder, the child's ability for memory and cognitive functions. From conventional understanding, all of the functions which that hemisphere of the brain took care of would no longer be implemented, leaving the child mentally deficient or fragmented in some form. If memories are stored in the brain, then after this operation, those children should have lost those memories pertaining to the removed portion of their brain, if memories are stored in the brain. Yet the results were astonishing and once again defied conventional thought. Dr. Eileen P.G. Vining of JHU studied 54 of the children who underwent the operation, and she was simply astounded by the, quote, retention of memory and by the retention of the child's personality and sense of humor. A new version of the study was published in 2003 by Johns Hopkins University that dealt with 111 kids who had the operation between 1975 and 2003. Out of these 111 children, 86% of them were seizure-free and no longer needed medication. Taken from the Source Field Investigations by David Wilcock. For more evidence, we move towards the work of Dr. John Lorber, who is one of the world's top experts on the condition known as hydrocephalus. Hydrocephalus is due to a problem with the flow of cerebral spinal fluid, which surrounds and cushions the brain, and where there is a blockage in this flow, the pressure within the individual's cranium is increased. Hydrocephalus means literally water on the brain, and brain swelling in this case leads to an oftentimes dramatic compression of brain tissue. Dr. Lorber studied a total of 253 people with this condition. In the most severe cases, the pressure in the brain would increase to such a high level that the brain tissue would be compacted, leaving the patient with only a fraction of their original amount of brain tissue. In Dr. Lorber's study, 9 people reached this severity with around only 5% of their total brain tissue left. That means only 5% of their neurons, brain cells, synapses, and so on were available in the patient's brain. Amazingly, 4 out of 9 of those people with less than 5% of their brain tissue had an IQ over 100, and 2 out of 9 had an IQ greater than 126. In other words, 66.6% of them were fine. Given the drastic loss of brain tissue, the obvious question is, how is this possible? How can someone with almost literally no brain be intelligent at all, let alone above average? Dr. Lorber was directed to a student at his university by his peers. Literally based on the intriguingly large size of his head, they thought he may be of potential interest. This student had an IQ of 126 and had a, quote, first-class honors degree in mathematics and is socially completely normal. A brain scan was done on this individual with surprising results. It was found that out of the normal 4.5 centimeter of brain tissue, his condition has been compressed to only a few millimeters. In other words, his head filled with cerebral spinal fluid and only a few millimeters of brain tissue, yet he was still high functioning with above average intelligence. Also taken from the source of the investigations, David Wilcock. I have no technical understanding of how this is even possible, except to simply suggest that possibly the conductivity and crystalline nature of water may be a contributing factor. Yet, what this should clearly illustrate is that we know very little about the true nature of mind or the brain. Both of these once again demonstrate that the mind is independent of the brain. This evidence raises some important questions. What is the real function of our brains? Is it the brain tissue itself that creates our intelligence? Or is it the electrical and conductive nature of the brain that allows us to connect to intelligence, more or less like a sophisticated antennae, just like Nikola Tesla observed of himself early in the 20th century? All of this information so far creates a lot of friction with the current propagated understanding of the brain if it doesn't debunk it altogether. The information that Penfield discovered is suggesting that our brains are independent of our minds and that all our memories are recorded in their entirety and with the same detail that we experience them from where we do not yet know. I also suggest that this is evidence that we have the potential for holographic memory. This, hypothetically, is a possible function of our minds where our memory is projected powerfully onto reality, onto the screen of the universal consciousness, so that we can experience and relive our memories in 3D. After all, this is what Walter Penfield's patients experienced. As Johns Hopkins University and John Lorber's research found, it may not be that our brains are really that important. If children can have half their brains removed and retain their memories and personality, and if people can function with less than 5% of their brain tissue with above average intelligence, then what is the true purpose of the brain but as a vehicle for intelligence, not as the source of intelligence? It is like a highly sophisticated biotechnology that we use to experience this level of reality, create reality, and express ourselves. Like in the movie Avatar, maybe we are not actually our bodies but are just operating them. Is our brain really where memories are stored? There is actually no evidence to support that even our memories are stored in the brain, and never has there been a memory discovered in the brain. This is because our brains are constantly changing and are not fixed structures. The evidence is finally lining up with ancient spiritual truths from every culture which expressed explicitly that we are divine and that our true nature is conscious awareness, and that we are merely a fragment of that divine consciousness expressed in physical form. In conclusion, we may be vastly underestimating the power of our minds and our true abilities to use them. If our minds can remember entire songs of perfection or orchestral performances that we only heard in passing, then what is stopping us from accessing this on a conscious level? It seems that every single detail of our lives is recorded with our brain, so the question I have is, how do we access that information and from where do we access it? This evidence provides a truly exciting shift in the way we can view our minds and, more importantly, our potential. If an electrode in our brain is able to stimulate such vivid recollection, is it not possible that we can develop our imagination and our mental abilities to this point naturally so that we can use that ability at will? Is it not possible that there is much more going on during a simple thought process or recollection of an event than we give ourselves credit for? That is exactly what Wilder Penfield found, which caused him at the end of his career to see the nature of mind as a field of energy or information which Deepak Chopra termed the mind field. What if your essence is not in your brain or in your body, but in a formless field of energy?
Science can explain everything if we look hard enough.
Shut up, science bitch.
Nothing is true. Everything is real.
Not only is he like ruining my life, but with all this God shit that he's into, he could be ruining my afterlife.
It's a sort of interdimensional vagina that somehow appears. I can interact with it.
Fabric of the entire universe could be torn apart.
I know my mind is crazy.